On a crisp March afternoon in 1982, a multi-day storm struck the Lake Tahoe area. The media was reporting avalanche on top of avalanche, along with a mass amount of snow that was falling every hour. The families who rented cabins were pushing furniture against the sliding doors to help reinforce the barrier between them and the blizzard, as they wondered if there was a way for them to escape before they ran out of food. Yet, when an avalanche came barreling down the mountain, these cabins were the safest place to be. Volunteers all buried their trauma and stepped up to do everything they could to help in the face of devastation. Despite this wall of white creating a snow globe-esk look, the dangers and disappointment were felt to the bone at every body, bruised and blue, that was pulled from the snow. A rescue mission is always, at best, controlled chaos, a fight against time, distance, terrain, and the elements. Yet, Bridget, a German Shepherd search and rescue dog, was seen bounding happily in the snow and tossing a piece of debris to herself. To anyone else, this might have been normal or even expected behavior. After all, these dogs are trained to find the bodies of those buried beneath the snow and then rewarded for it. Yet, to her handler, Bridget was celebrating, and 3 days later, everyone would learn why. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. I am your host, Kayla, and I've got Amanda back, and also you may hear Sam's voice on occasion because this is Amanda's and I's second time going through this because we recorded it and then I made the rookie mistake of not turning the microphones on. So, gonna sound a little bit different, I'm sure, because we're gonna have already talked about things, and so new thoughts may come up, or we may reference something that we said when we were not recording. So, welcome back.
We left it quite the cliffhanger last time.
We left at a very big cliffhanger. So to catch everyone up, it was 3:45 p.m., March 31st, and Jake, one of the ski patrolmen, called in an avalanche.
So as a recap, we've got some people in the Summit Terminal building.
Yep, there were people in the Summit Terminal building. They heard the word avalanche come through on the radio, and the building was blown apart. And that's where we left off. At the time of Jake's radio transmission, the patrol group that was heading up the ski lift heard some commotion on the radio, but no words actually came through. That's when the men suddenly got a radio call from the general manager at Alpine Meadows, which was odd considering that the radios didn't have the best distance reception. They all began to worry, as all that came through was get the dogs, get an ambulance. Despite not knowing anything about what they were going back to, they essentially abandoned what they were doing at Squaw Valley and headed back towards Alpine Meadows. Adding to a whole bunch of confusion that was going on throughout the area, the news had reported about the avalanche at Squaw Valley, but the devastating one was at Alpine Meadows.
Wait, was there an actual avalanche at Squaw Valley?
There was. Nobody was caught up in it.
Okay.
Actually, I think, so it destroyed a house, and I believe somebody was either in the house or in another house that was kind of sort of affected by it, but she came out just fine. She was not in... Yeah. I don't want to say that she wasn't in any danger at all, but she wasn't at the same level of risk as being actually swept up in the avalanche.
Yeah.
So a snowplow driver had been on Ginson Road, which was near Alpine Meadows, when the avalanche came down and almost caught him in it, and he was able to report to the sheriff what he witnessed, which was also when he learned that the second avalanche had run over the junction of the highway and Alpine Meadows Road. So effectively, help was walled out of Alpine Meadows. As word spread, even with this being in a time where social media and cell phones were not a thing, employees and volunteers began to make their way into Alpine Meadows to see how they were able to help. As the avalanche came barreling to a stop in the parking lot of Alpine Meadows, the men who had been working in and near the maintenance shed and the parking lot were in disbelief, especially after they recalled seeing two people walking through the deep snow that had been collecting in the parking lot. Just before that, the men heard a sharp crack and then the sounds of twigs breaking. What they actually had been hearing was the crack of the slab avalanche breaking away, and then as trees were sucked into the fury, the twigs breaking were actually trees that were hundreds of years old snapping. And so I was talking to Amanda about the size of these trees. Trees so big you can't wrap your arms around them were snapping, and they sounded like toothpicks. Mike, from his position just outside of the maintenance shed, had a view of the events as they unfolded. The white cloud in front of the avalanche grew larger and larger as it came down the mountain, estimating it to be 40 feet high. He saw it as it descended onto the parking lot and onto the people who had been walking through.
So for listeners, we have already recorded this. We had some technical difficulties. So after we recorded, Monday? I went home, and this week I watched the documentary, and one of the maintenance guys was on the show, and he describes watching it and seeing it, and he said, he's getting emotional because he's like, I see people like 45 feet from me, and then in an instant they're gone, and he's getting emotional, thinking, well, like, why them and not me, and because he could just see them, and it would be really, really tough to witness, especially one being a child, 3 human beings, and then it's nothing.
Yeah.
Especially with the knowledge that he probably had that survival is low.
Yeah.
Given the conditions. So it was a tough interview.
Yeah. So real quick, if anybody's interested, the documentary is called Buried. I think if you search Alpine Meadows Avalanche 1982, it will come up. It's going to be one of the results that just like generally comes up. And then if you are interested, the book that I got the bulk of this information out of is called Wall of White by Jennifer Woodleaf. Very, very, very good book. It's a good book. Of course, this isn't the only account of what happened, and I think Ray might have been who was interviewed, potentially.
I don't remember
because he was in the parking lot bulldozing and moving snow. So he was on the edge of the avalanche as it descended, and then from his vehicle, he watched in stunned horror as 3 people, 2 men and 1 girl, sprinted towards the lodge. The girl we know as Laura slipped and fell, and in what we can only assume is fatherly instinct, Bud stopped in his tracks, turned back for his daughter, swept her into his arms, and started running again. At this point, the snow filled the parking lot, obstructing Ray's view, and when everything was stilled, the parking lot was buried under 20 feet of snow. So in all, less than 30 seconds had passed between the men hearing the crack and the disaster that followed.
We talked about that last time. The immense amount of speed and power coming down. I mean,
and
it's unfathomable.
Yeah.
What
Cannot
that would be
comprehend.
like. Yeah.
Cannot comprehend it. Unless you've experienced it, you cannot comprehend it. The air blast that preceded the snow hit the Summit Terminal building, blowing out windows and causing the foundation and beams to shake. Immediately after, snow in its water-like state forced into every nook and cranny and then exploded outward. Only the main supports of the building were left protruding out of the snow when it came to a halt. And I will be posting pictures on social media of the damage that this building sustained. And so if you listen to part 1, which
I didn't know avalanches have air blasts like a bomb.
yes, they do. If you listen to part 1, you can learn more about it. If you haven't listened to part 1, I highly suggest you go back and listen to that. It's a lot of information. It's very information heavy, but avalanches by nature produce so much speed as they're coming down the mountain that it's like imagine you're driving a semi. There's like a bit of air built up in front of it, and then it like flows out to the sides, and it's that like building air in the very front that is destructive. and that's what hit the Summit Terminal building.
The physics and like the thermodynamics that we just barely touched on last time was fascinating.
Yeah, barely scraped the surface on it.
Yeah.
So the lodge then had been mostly spared. It knocked out the power and some windows, dumping snow into only the rooms that were facing the mountain. And due to this, the lodge became the new headquarters for finding people lost in the snow. In an insane stroke of luck, Tad and Randy had been standing near the main 22-ton counterweight for the ski lift. And when the snow flooded in through the Summit Terminal building, the counterweight acted as a divide, and the snow split, moved around the divide, and then converged back on the other side. And Tad and Randy were standing just on that edge. They got swept up, but they were not buried.
I got chills again.
Randy had gotten swallowed by slow-moving snow and was able to find purchase with his feet and launch himself up out of the snow current. Randy got swept up onto the top of the snow current, and he would later say that you could hear the rumble and the building was shaking just before the air blast hit.
They said that in the
building.
documentary, like there were like steel beams shaking before it hit.
So the amount of power
Dude.
and the amount of stuff coming down this mountain was, I mean, this might be dramatic, but almost like a little micro earthquake.
Oh, I mean, at least.
Yeah.
But I mean, you think about it. We talked about this last time. Like you shovel wet snow, and you just have a shovelful, and you're like, geez, it feels like 60 pounds.
Yeah.
Now you think of a whole freaking mountainside, and it's got momentum.
A lot of momentum.
So it's gaining speed as it falls down. Yeah, it's insane to think about.
Upwards of 200 miles per hour.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just like a train coming down the mountain.
On top of the snow, he found Tad next to him, who was buried up to his waist and hanging out of the building. So one of the windows walls was blown out. They were on the second story. The second story had been mostly buried, and it had picked up Tad. The snow flowed like out that opening in the side of the building and then came to a stop with Tad hanging there. One of Tad's legs was trapped by debris, and as much as Randy tried, he was unable to free him. It was later discovered that Randy had a broken rib and a compression fracture in his low back, but with Tad's permission, he left him hanging to go look for Beth, Bernie, and Jeff, who were also standing in the same room. And by this point, others were already collecting and trying to sort out a game plan. In an ironic twist, no one who typically organized the search and rescue for Alpine Meadows was available because they were either at Squaw Valley trying to do avalanche control, at home because they had just worked for 2 or 3 days on end and didn't get a break, or they were in the Summit Terminal building. Billy Patterson, a friend of Jake's, quickly ran to the scene and noticed a hand poking up out of the snow. Immediately, he started to shout that he had found someone and started digging for what he said felt like an eternity. And they found the hand belonged to Jeff. He was buried almost 2 feet under the snow, covered with plywood. He was unconscious but alive. And he quickly came back to and had a concussion, a large cut on his hairline, cuts on his face, and bruises all over his body. Once Jeff was safe in the lodge, Billy then shifted his role to ushering people into Alpine Meadows. So he used a Snowcat Packmaster 3700. If you don't know what that looks like, look it up. It's basically a giant truck on tread wheels.
Yeah.
It's like a tractor construction vehicle mix, and you can see how they move through snow very easily.
Yeah.
So this truck has a hood, a cab for the driver, and then a flatbed on the back. The cab only has enough room for one person, but Billy was basically like, we need to get all of the patrolmen into Alpine Meadows as fast as possible. So he met them out on the main highway, and he fit 2 more people into the cab with him. Some of the men were on the hood of this monster, and then people were sitting on the flatbed, and 2 of the patrolmen who couldn't really fit anywhere else used their skis and a rope to tie to the back of the Packmaster and just got pulled behind him as they went. And so if you'll imagine, the amount of snow that they had been plowing was just like piling up on the side of the road and was like getting taller than what this vehicle was. And as he was going down the road, it was really only wide enough for like a vehicle. And so he was like bouncing between the 2 walls of snow. And cars that were stuck there, he was just going right through them. He was later asked in a news interview how many of the cars that he hit, and he told them that I hit them all.
It's just like
He was,
snow plinko
yeah,
down the road.
he was not gonna slow down to go around those
Yeah.
vehicles. In the meantime, Mike and Randy got to work trying to sweep the parking lot for the people that they had just seen minutes before, improvising probes out of electrical conduit that was cut into 15 to 20 foot long sections, which had been stored in a locked storage room inside of the maintenance shed. Rich, who was basically running on adrenaline and anxiety, was having a hard time controlling his hand enough to get the key in the lock of the door. And in frustration, he decided to screw that and broke the lock off of the door.
Yeah.
Within 5 minutes, a group had gathered in the parking lot and were probing the snow. 40 minutes later, a body was found deep in the snow. Dave Hahn was beneath 10 feet of snow, and it took 40 minutes for volunteers to dig him out. His arms were frozen, extended overhead, and his eyes were wide open. Immediately after clearing him from the snow, workers started CPR and chest compressions, but they very quickly realized that there would be no bringing him back. By this time, the patrolmen had arrived, and they noticed that what was left of the snowmobile Jake had been on was kind of like poking up out of the snow. And so Casey began to search for Jake by using his avalanche beacon. Casey was able to locate him within a minute, and then they used probes to probe the area, hoping to find Jake. But despite this, Jake was too deep for the poles to reach. Next, they started digging, and where they found him locationally was kind of near a creek and a bridge. And so some people were on top of the snow, and then other people went down. They went into that creek and started digging under the bridge to try to access him faster. 6 to 8 people were digging, but they didn't have enough shovels for everyone, so a couple of the men were digging the snow with their hands, which, if you'll remember, in the first part, we talked about how hard that snow gets and how you have to like chip it away. So imagine chipping away with a shovel hard snow with your hands.
And it would be like agonizingly slow, knowing the stakes.
Yeah.
You know, if you're out there just messing around trying to build a snowman, like, okay, it's going to take a while, but knowing that there's a body on the other side of it, potentially alive,
Time is of the essence.
then it's like, shit,
Yeah.
this is so slow.
Yeah. About 15 feet down, they found Jake in a standing position, leaning back like he was looking up towards the sky. As soon as his face was free, patrolmen scooped the snow out from his mouth and started CPR while others kept digging. Jake's skin was blue like faded jeans, and he had evidence of crushing injuries. He was freed from the snow around 5:15, and one of the volunteers who came to help dig him out turned out to be a doctor. And after 35 minutes of CPR, he announced Jake's time of death, and Igor collapsed to his knees and cried. Randy searched and searched until he was in too much pain and retired to the lodge, which was now acting as their medical station, morgue, and employee headquarters, but before going in, he returned to Tad and helped to dig him out. As darkness descended, flashlights and headlamps were carried and machinery was turned on to light up the area. As practiced as the patrolmen were when it came to rescues, they had never actually practiced or performed a rescue when it was dark. With limited equipment, missing crew, a missing leader, and with the very present threat of more severe weather and avalanches, with their focus on rescuing anyone that they could, the patrolmen were not out performing avalanche control, which means that the risks were not getting any better. They were only increasing.
Well, because the weather was still bad, right? It was still snowing.
Yes. So attention then turned towards the destroyed Summit Terminal building. Debris was everywhere and the probes were nearly useless with all of the rubble. And as I mentioned in part 1, Ski Patrol had 4 plans for how to deal with disaster. All 4 of these did not account for a disaster of this level. And with the roads being closed and snow covered, the patrolmen were literally on their own. About this time, Don and Roberta Huber arrived with their search and rescue dogs to help find the bodies.
So 6 people
Are still
buried by the first evening. Okay.
Yep. Kate Olberg, she was one of the volunteers. She went to the cabins to get a head count of people there to determine who might have been missing. So she discovers that Laura, Bud, and Dave were the 3 missing people who had been in the parking lot as the avalanche smashed down. Shortly after Kate returned to the resort, it was around 7 p.m., Bud Nelson was found nearly 20 feet below the surface, and like Dave, he also had his arms extended overhead. Again, rescuers tried to give him CPR despite knowing that there was no life left. At 10:45 p.m., a sheriff arrived to inform Jeanne and Katie that their husbands had died in the avalanche. In opposite reactions, Katie became hysterical and Jeanne shut down. Around 11 p.m., Bob and Jim made the drastic decision to temporarily call off the search. With the storm picking up steam, the last thing they wanted to do was put more people in danger, and with darkness and cold setting in, with the 7 hours that had passed since the avalanche came to a halt, they knew that the risk was higher than the reward for everyone involved. Sandy, who's Anna's roommate, started to become really nervous, and she was one of the few houses that still had a working phone. And in the days that followed, the parents of Anna, Beth, and Frank all would just call her and call her and call her and call her, asking for an update, and she just didn't have anything to give them, which has to be terrible considering that you're a college-aged girl. You show up to a ski town because you want to be there. As we talked about in part 1, they're living in a cabin that has a skating rink in it because of a busted water pipe. Like, she wants to be there, and now she's having to be like, I don't know where they're at. There's been this horrible disaster. I have no information, to families who, I can't imagine if Logan was to ever be in something like that, I would be hysterical. I feel bad for this girl having to deal with hysterical parents.
Yeah, she's not emotionally equipped for that. And also, what started and has been for her a place of solace and escape and fun now turns into a nightmare.
Yes.
Now she's trapped and her friends are missing, presumably dead, and she's fielding calls from family members.
Yeah.
So it's a complete 180 experience for a young girl to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Which is tough.
Next day, April 1st, the day begins with the storm temporarily breaking, and the patrolmen were able to see that the avalanche was from Poma Rocks, the Buttress, and Pond Slope, showing that the 3 slopes had avalanches break away simultaneously and combine into one massive force of destruction. It was determined that this avalanche was as catastrophic as it was because once the slab broke away from the upper parts of the mountain, it was riding down and collecting up all of the loose snow that had been falling the days prior. It minimized the friction and allowed the avalanche to move faster and farther. roughly 3,200 square feet of snow released from the mountain and barreled down an 800-foot slope. So Larry Haywood would call this a once-in-a-century catastrophe. Squaw Valley and Heavenly Valley Ski Resort both offered up personnel and equipment for help, and with this was a helicopter to help bomb, which was ideal considering that most of the slopes were inaccessible by foot, and some of the ammunition and keys needed for the rifles had been stored in the summit terminal building. Jim and Lanny clear out a space for a helicopter to land, give them the approximate location, and then as they see a helicopter approach over the horizon, they light smoke bombs so that way they're easily seen. Upon landing, they quickly find out that the helicopter wasn't Heavenly Valley's after all. It belonged to Channel 3 News. Worried that they would lose the window of calm weather, Lanny and Jim commandeered the helicopter. The cameraman and all of his equipment were tossed out of the helicopter. They removed the doors and then loaded their bombs onto the helicopter, got up into the air, and the pilot was like, "What you boys got back there?" And they both, like, straight-faced were just like, "Bombs." And like the pilot was just like, "Nope, I don't need to know anymore.
Say no more.
Do your thing. I'm just gonna be in my window over here."
Insert helicopter hijacking.
Yeah. With the weather beginning to move in again, they had to call it on the use of the helicopter. And despite the risk, once the control concluded, hundreds returned to the summit terminal building and parking lot to search for the 5 missing people. With them, the Hubers and their dogs returned. Avalanche dogs have a really grim job because it nearly always means finding a body instead of a living person, but handlers have done a great job of keeping the job fun and rewarding for them. Around 3 p.m., equipment cleared a large pile of wood and debris, and with it came the signal of an avalanche beacon. The debris had caused the signal to be disrupted, and with it, searchers dug down 15 feet and found Beth. She had been smashed against a wall and her left leg clearly broken. At the same time, workers pulled down a wall and found Frank wedged into a corner and pinned between a wall and some lockers. His face had begun to ice over, indicating that his cause of death had been suffocation. However, it was quickly realized that even if he had been found in time, the crushing injuries he had from the wall and the lockers would have been insurmountable.
Quick note about Frank. In the documentary, they talk about finding him, and his face was frozen, but it was frozen in a state of severe, like, contortion.
Okay.
And they said, one of the people that found him said it was absolutely horrifying to see, because he looked like he was in severe pain. And then he was frozen that way. Yeah.
Hair is standing up. Out in the parking lot, almost 24 hours later, a searcher with a probe felt the sick, soft feeling of something different under the snow. 12 feet of snow later, Laura's body was uncovered. So later that afternoon, the kennel portion of the summit terminal building became accessible. Hearing a dog whine, a ski instructor who was clearing up the area called Jim, who dropped what he was doing and rushed over. Reaching down, Jim felt a wet nose poke his hand. Mariah. Oh yeah, Mariah.
I know.
Mariah licked his hand, pulled away for a moment, and then returned to bite down on his hand like, "I'm never letting you go." Despite hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion, and shock, she survives. So overnight on the 1st and into the 2nd, they did not call off the search this night, and about 90 people at any given time could be found searching for victims. As the day of searching on the 2nd beat really began, it was well known that they were only looking for 2 more bodies. Roberta Huber and her dog Bridget were searching the area near the summit terminal building, and almost as soon as they got there, Bridget took off like she smelled something. She ran around the building once and then squeezed herself into a gap of debris. 1, 2, 3, the seconds ticked on. A minute passed, and then 90 seconds, and just as Roberta began to truly worry, Bridget came out of the hole head first. She bounded over to Roberta, wagging her tail, jumping and licking Roberta's face, and then, as if she wanted to be abundantly clear, she grabbed a scrap of wood and tossed it into the air. And this told Roberta two things. First, that there was enough room at the bottom of the wreckage that Bridget was able to turn around, and second, Bridget had found someone, and Roberta was certain that Bridget was telling her they were alive. Just as searchers moved over to dig, their radios rung with the voice demanding that everyone evacuate so avalanche control could be performed. Then, in defeat, the search was called off due to the high potential of avalanches. The storm continued to dump inches of snow into the slopes, which hadn't moved in 48 hours, and caused the patrolmen to be on high alert for avalanche activity. And unfortunately, the only place for an avalanche from Beaver Bowl, which was the slope that hadn't released an avalanche in 48 hours, the only place for that to run out in was in the same location they were currently working. For 3 days, the storm and threat kept searchers away. And much like I imagined the suspense that Bridget and Roberta were in for those 3 days, we are going to take a quick segue over to search and rescue dogs and a little bit about them and why they are your best shot at being found in an avalanche.
Yay, dogs.
Woo. Woof, woof. Historically, search and rescue dogs have been used since the early 18th century, starting with monks who lived in the Great St. Bernard Pass, which is a 49-mile route that leads through the Alps from Italy to Switzerland. At roughly 8,000 feet above sea level, the pass sees snow 8 to 10 months out of the year. In the 1660s and 1670s, these monks received their first St. Bernard dogs. They were smaller than the breed we recognize today, with shorter reddish-brown and white coats and longer tails. They had broad chests, and this helped them to clear a path through the snow for travelers, and they were trusted enough to be sent out in packs of 2 or 3 to find lost and missing people. In 1830, the dogs began to be bred with Newfoundlands because the breed was quickly dwindling in numbers, with the thought that the longer fur would help protect the dog from the cold. So this breeding essentially bred the original St. Bernard out of the breed. But the warmth and protection from the extra long coat is not what happened. Instead, the dogs became too warm, melted the snow, and then that collected on their fur and froze, creating dogs walking around with ice and snowballs dangling in their coats, slowing them down and in turn making them colder.
I mean, classic human intervention gone wrong. It happens all the time.
All the time. Somewhere around 1855, these dogs were taken from the Swiss Valley and bred with English Mastiffs, which created the dogs that we recognize as St. Bernards today. These days, German Shepherds, Labrador Retrievers, Golden Retrievers, and Border Collies can be found assisting handlers with finding people under the snow. Most dogs are females when it comes to avalanche dogs because their smaller size gives them the added ease on their handlers when it comes time for dogs to ride on the shoulders of their handlers skiing down a hill or a mountain. I think mountain is probably more accurate than a hill.
Yeah.
We only have hills in Ohio.
Anyone they're saving at the bottom of the hill is not worth saving.
Yeah. And finding people under the snow, one type of search that dogs can assist with. Some others include cadaver and water dogs. Both specifically smell for people who have passed. And then there's avalanche, urban disaster, wilderness, and evidence of article dogs that all smell for the human scent, not necessarily for the scent of decomposing tissue like that of cadaver and water dogs. Dogs have really powerful noses, and one of the other contributing factor in their capacity to find people are that humans are just naturally really smelly. We shed skin cells in clumps called rafts, which leave behind very distinctly human sense. A dog's sense of smell is hyper-tuned to be able to give them information about not only current status, but historical as well, no matter if they are smelling for food, curiosity, a person, another dog, another animal, or even just to figure out like locationally where they are. Dogs' sense of smell is so sensitive that they can smell for drugs, explosives, illnesses such as diabetes, and sense change in emotion.
Oh, and cancer,
And cancer, yeah.
which is crazy.
Because of the complexity of dogs' olfaction system, which is their sense of smell, they can get a 3D picture of an area or who they are smelling, which allows them to work more precisely with location. Dogs have upwards of 3 million receptors in their nose alone in comparison to humans who only have 6 million. And dogs are able to recognize more senses than they have smell receptors for, because they are able to cross-reference patterns of smell, and they have smell receptors in both of their nostrils, above the roof of their mouth, and along the nasopalatine duct, which begins behind the upper incisors. The way that they smell and breathe helps to pull scents along these receptors, each of which test for different things. And to be more clear, this means that in dogs, each location of sensor, even in the nostrils, work independently of each other, and they're all smelling for different things. Dogs are super unique in their ability to learn and adapt, so much so that through their lifetime, their sense of smell begins to have a memory and can understand more complex smells. But then, much as humans, dogs get older and their sense of smell begins to change and decline. So many search and rescue dogs retire in the 10 to 12 age range.
Which I was surprised to hear. That's pretty old.
That is very old. Especially for like, I mean,
Yeah,
they're
larger-ish
large.
breeds.
Yeah.
It's like 15 is pretty good. That's really good.
They can cover a snow-swept area 2.5 acres large in about 30 minutes, and it takes dozens of people several hours to search that same area. Additionally, snow changes the characteristics of everything it comes in contact with, including scent, which makes it more enticing for dogs to smell in those areas. There is also the unfortunate effect that some smells are so strong that it can overwhelm their ability to smell, and it kind of makes their sense of smell shut down for a period of time. And this came into play at Alpine Meadows because they had so much machinery in there trying to pick up the debris of the Summit Terminal building. The diesel fuel was interfering with the dogs and was causing a lot of issues. Moving over to dog training, when finding a dog for search and rescue work, their personalities as puppies play a huge role as to who gets selected to go into training. Puppies that play for hours and hours and then want to keep playing are highly desired because that is a trainable trait. And so that search and rescue and finding a person becomes game and reward. Puppies start their training sometimes as young as 8 weeks old. These dogs develop strong attachments to their handlers, and their handlers are often the ones who train them. With the fact that it takes about 600 hours alone for dogs to be field ready, these dogs and handlers learn how to read each other, and it's very important for especially handlers to be able to read their dogs in search and rescue situations. Training starts extremely simple. So you've got like a step process. And once you've mastered one step, you move on to the next one, which is really only a step forward. And it starts with figuring out what that dog's favorite toy is. What's their favorite game? And having someone assist in holding the dog, have the dog sit, person goes and runs and lays down in the snow. Dog is released immediately, goes to the handler, and they play. And then they introduce visual blocks, so either like a wall of snow or some trees or pile of dirt or something to kind of just like break that dog's visual of their handler. And then it progresses to the handler will run and hide in a hole of snow. So the dog actually has to do a little bit of digging to get there. And then it progresses from the handler being the one that hides to someone that the dog is familiar being the one that hides. And it progresses all the way until, they're finding people that they've never met. It takes roughly 2 years for dogs to complete its training, and then it starts its life as a search and rescue dog.
It's such a tedious process to train dogs well.
For that particular.
I mean, for anything, to train an animal is tedious. It's so small and incremental, and you're constantly like recalibrating. Mm-hmm. As soon as they get off course, you're backtracking. Like, okay, like re-solidify this pattern over and over and over. Okay, we'll inch it forward a hair.
All right, so search and rescue personnel spend about 1,000 hours themselves becoming familiar with the field before they ever step foot in the search and rescue role. Their training includes dog training and handling, weather pattern and navigation training, radio communications, basic survival and wilderness skills, basic first aid, and CPR. The United States credentialing requires that search and rescue handlers go through FEMA or Federal Emergency Management Agency to be certified, and it's part of the FEMA Emergency Responder Credentialing System, which maintains a list of search and rescue personnel to respond to disaster. In 2020, this list included 284 search teams for survivors and 90 cadaver and water dogs. These people typically go through these certifications, courses, trainings, all out of pocket, which means that search and rescue personnel are volunteers. Most ski resorts have dogs and search and rescue personnel there on site at all times, but with the care and effort put into avalanche control, it's extremely rare for an avalanche to occur inside of a resort anymore. Most of the time they occur in the backcountry where it's a little bit more sketchy for you to go. It's the really brave people who go there. All the really cool Instagram videos is in the backcountry. Search and rescue teams are made up of people in a variety of fields such as engineers, doctors, IT professionals, lawyers, and then of course people in more related fields and people working in national parks or more tactical related work. Because most people are on call 24/7, 365 days a year, dogs will often go with their handlers to work and even on vacation. Often search and rescue teams have equipment that they also bring with them, and this can include severe weather gear, radios, rope, harnesses, compass, maps, food, water, and the list goes on. When it comes to avalanche search and rescue, crews are often flown in on a helicopter, but if there's a backcountry or even a water rescue, handler and dog teams will occasionally rappel down into the area they need to be in. In avalanches, the likelihood of finding a person alive is so small that handlers have become really good at discreetly playing and rewarding their dogs for finding someone. Dogs are insurmountable in importance when it comes to looking for people under the snow. With beacons failing and being interfered with by debris, dogs are the standard, with the exception of when you are with someone who knows where you might be. Along with this, the chances of getting swept into an avalanche are low, but never zero. And I said this last time that I'm telling you this, they're very low, because I don't want to scare people out of going out and enjoying the snow and enjoying the outdoors. And Amanda so politely informed me that I was 3 hours too late for that.
That warning came far too late.
Far too late. From 1969 to 2009, 60-year period, 59 people were found with the help of dogs. Only 2 of those people were alive. And those surviving were under extremely lucky circumstances. One of them is in this story. We are fast forwarding now 3 days. It's April 5th. 4 more feet of snow have accumulated on the mountains, and 300 people from the area had been evacuated due to the avalanche threat. Yet at 12:22 p.m., searchers piled back into the Summit Terminal building, desperate to find the body of who Bridget had found 3 days prior. First, Bridget wiggled herself down into the hole and minutes later reappeared and having the same response. Jumping for joy, she signaled to Roberta that she had found someone. Shoveling and using snowcats to remove the snow and debris, they carefully dug down to 15 feet. As they excavated the area, Bernard thought for a moment that he saw a hand. He told Lanny what he saw and got down on his hands and knees to reach into a hole the size of his arm. Flying backwards, Bernard yelled at Meredith, another worker, to quit messing around. This wasn't a time for games. Confused, Meredith crouched down next to him, and that's when it hit him that Bernard had reached his hand into a hole where he had thought he had seen a hand, and then that hand grabbed a hold of his. Fighting to grip the unbelievable, they all saw a small hand reach out of the hole Bernard had just retreated from. "Anna, is that you?" Lanny yelled. "Of course it's me," she replied. It was 1:05 p.m. on April 5th, and Anna had survived being buried alive for 117 hours.
Wow, so snarky for 5 days in the hole. Jeez.
That's exactly what I said the first time we recorded it. I was like, and she's got sass.
Really? What in the world?
Not overlooking. In this instant, Bridget became the first dog in the United States of America to find an avalanche victim alive.
Ugh, I just got chills.
So Anna was able to hear everything that was going on under the snow for the entire time she was buried. She was able to hear the people above her. She was able to hear them when they located her. She was able to hear them when they called it off, and then when they returned. And the entire time that she was down there, she states that she had absolutely no doubt that they were coming back for her. They were going to get her out. And a little bit, we kind of discussed this a little bit when we were not recording. I wonder how much of it was the brain tricking you into something positive. Like, in order to survive, you have to grip to this idea that someone's coming back for you, and how much of it was just sheer intuition.
Hey, well, that's another Sam classic. Hope is having overly positive expectations.
I have never heard you say that.
Well, it's a Sam original.
Oh, it's HOP. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Okay.
So
I like it, Sam.
Anna's survival was due to her being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. She had been in the employee locker room when the avalanche hit. She was knocked down headfirst under a wooden bench with lockers falling on top of the bench, which then supported the 15 feet of snow that were above her. The area was small, and she was jammed into a V shape and unable to move very much at all. The area was about 5 feet long, 2 feet high, and 3 feet wide. Below her was carpet, and she was able to get into one of the lockers to put on extra clothes. Until she no longer could, she scraped and ate the snow and had found a pack of matches to light the area to help her see what her predicament was.
Well, what's wild about this is she's been, in some kind of head trauma. She's trapped in a dark, small, coffin-like space. What comes to my mind first is how worried are you? Even like initially when you come to and you realize you're trapped, at what point does this start crumbling? Like, is it gonna collapse in on me? And then you're just sitting there for days. Like, at some point maybe you get a little bit more confident, but like, is it gonna give? Also, once they start excavating and looking, are things gonna shift? And then all of a sudden stability gets lost and I get crushed under lockers.
I think so. In the little bit of extra research that I did for this second go around of us recording this, I wanted to have a little bit different things to say, so that way we didn't just have the same conversations over and over, which success. One of the things that I saw was something along the lines of, like, very quickly your body knows when it needs to conserve energy. And one of the first things that it shuts off is consciousness. So Anna had no idea that she had been buried for 5 days. She had no
I guess she lost
sense of
prices of
time.
time. Yeah.
And then she also didn't realize that she had survived an avalanche. She thought that the building exploded, which it did.
Yeah.
But she didn't realize that it was because of an avalanche. She didn't realize that there was snow above her.
They touch on that in the documentary. She talks about how she thought just bombs went off. Mm-hmm. Perhaps the patrolman bombs they use
There's
on the
I'm-
mountain. She was
right.
like, I never considered it was which is sort of weird, you know.
Locationally, that is.
Yeah, with context, you'd think, well, that's certainly a possibility. But for whatever reason, it didn't cross her mind, which I thought was super interesting.
They have a division that tries to control the avalanches. So if she trusts the division, why would she think an avalanche would happen?
Yeah.
If they're doing their job, she works with them, right?
Yeah. And I think, and I don't remember where exactly I mentioned this previously and if we were recording or not. So I'm going to say it again as if it was never recorded. The Summit Terminal building was considered a safe space. I'm not sure if it was because they thought an avalanche would never reach it, or if they just thought that with the counterweight being there and with the way that it was built, it was just indestructible. But they truly believed that this building was safe, which is why they stored all of their avalanche, all of the beacons, all of the probes, all of their ropes, harnesses, gear that they needed to perform avalanche, not only search, but also control was in this building. So I think everyone just thought it was safe. And the idea that an avalanche would destroy that building clearly was never a thought.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it became reality. So to give you an idea of how much destruction and debris was entangled in this area, Frank, where they found him, was feet away from Anna. And when they found Frank 3 days prior, they had no idea that she was there. Or 4 days prior. When others learned that they had found Anna alive, they abandoned their tasks and began digging her out as fast as they could. A helicopter was called to take her to the hospital, and at 1:38 p.m., she was freed. So they found her at 1:05.
It was a quick dig.
And dug her out in 33 minutes.
Yeah.
She was given oxygen before she was fully accessible, and then she passed out. The helicopter landed at 1:50 p.m. and silence overcame the area. Despite the snowstorm, wreckage, and chaos of finding someone alive, the only recognizable sounds were that of the wind and the helicopter blades whirling around. At 1:53, Anna was closed into the helicopter and lifted from the ground. As soon as it was in the air, the wind picked up a new sound, the sound of dozens of searchers and volunteers cheering, sobbing, and hollering in celebration and happiness while their hearts were still anchored to the snow. Less than 2 hours later, that anchor pulled down as Bernie's body was freed from his snowy tomb. He, as with the other men, had his arms raised above his head, fists clenched, and he was frozen solid. The coroner concluded that he had severe head trauma, likely from hitting a steel beam, causing him to pass instantly. He was the last victim to be found, and the patrolman, having worked closely with Bernie for years, felt that this had been his act of watching over the area, making sure that they spent their energy finding everyone else before coming for him. Anna had lost 20 pounds, had a black eye, and her forehead was split open, and they figured this out because of the damage to the area. Her forehead was split open not because she hit her head on anything, but because of the force of the wind the avalanche created, and her feet were frozen. Anna, though alive, was knocking on death's door. During the flight, the nurse found her veins.
She was knocking on death's door, but had enough snark to. She got rescued. Dang. Okay.
You know
I
what?
hope I have enough of that when I'm about on death's door.
You know what? That's probably why she survived. That attitude of being like, well, what the heck, is probably why she survived.
Certainly possible.
She had a literal angel on her shoulder because death wasn't done trying to grab her yet. During the flight, the nurse found that she had collapsed veins and they weren't able to get fluid in fast enough to save her life. So she did the only thing that she could do and cut directly into Anna's jugular vein. Once the fluid line was inserted, it was turned up as fast as it could go. During the flight, the nurse and pilot got into a fight about where to take her. And because she was awake, they finally asked her, she told them to go to Tahoe Forest Hospital in Truckee so she could be close to her friends. The toxins Anna's frozen and decaying feet had created moved through her body and were pressing hard on Anna's kidney and liver. And even after 10 days in the hospital, there was a very real concern of her organs completely failing. One night, one of the IVs attached to her jugular vein split open and she almost bled to death, and a nurse just happened to notice.
Yeah, it's wild.
So at this point, she was still dehydrated. So over 10 days in the hospital with a fluid line in her jugular vein, turned up as high as it could go, and she's still considered dehydrated. She had 7 different IVs at any given time, and one night shortly after almost bleeding out, Anna stopped breathing and was brought back thanks to the quick actions of nurses. After 3 weeks, doctors felt that she was strong enough to be able to begin amputating toes. While stuck beneath the snow, Anna had removed her snow boots occasionally to rub and warm her feet, and at one point she forgot to put one of them back on, and this actually saved her foot because snow boots are very tight and extremely compressive. And between the swelling that is accompanied with frostbite and the compression of the boots being on her foot, she lost all circulation in that foot and her bones died. In total, Anna had multiple surgeries on her feet over a few months, losing all of the toes and the ball of her left foot, and then her right leg was amputated 7 inches below her knee. In June, she was released from the hospital and she was back skiing by Christmas. And so then real quick, I just wanna again, because I know it's a lot of information, go over the people who lost their lives here. So we had Bernie Kingery, David Hahn, Leroy Nelson, Laura Nelson, Jake Smith, Beth Morrow, and Frank Yeatman. And before we fully conclude, because the law is something that's interesting to me, I looked up information about the lawsuits that were filed. In 1982, the family of Dave Hahn and the family of Bud and Laura Nelson together sued Alpine Meadows, saying that they had strict liability to perform certain actions and make sure that people were safe. Strict liability is an intentional or negligent act that causes harm or death, and negligence is just basically, in law, it's saying that you're behaving in a way that does not match what a reasonable person would do in these circumstances. They claimed Alpine Meadows marketed a dangerous product, that is skiing facilities in an avalanche-prone area. And then, we already covered that this was a very, very high-risk area for avalanches. It's the only Class A avalanche area in the United States. To the relief of the ski patrol members, the case was dismissed by the judge of the San Francisco Superior Court on December 23rd, 1985. So if you ever have any questions about how long the legal system takes, just know that this giant case took 3 years to get a decision.
Yeah, large wheels turn slowly.
Yes. And then the second lawsuit that occurred at this time was from Anna Conrad, and she wanted them to cover her medical bills because insurance did not cover prosthetics. So this ended up being settled out of court in 1983, and for people who don't understand how insurance and those payments and whatnot works is usually under general way of doing things. Anna, her representative, family, whoever, would have gone to Alpine Meadows and said, you owe us money. And whoever was representing them legally, I don't know if they had like some sort of self-representation, or if their insurance had self-representation, or if they had to hire someone, they initially would say, no, we don't owe you a dime. Or there might be some sort of negotiation going on. So they might be like, okay, fine, we'll pay you $1,000. And they're like, no, my left toe cost $1,000. I lost all of my toes and part of my leg. I need more. And they just like got to a point where they no longer were negotiating. The only way to get more money is to file a lawsuit. Because once you file a lawsuit, it's gonna go in front of a judge unless you settle out of court, which they did settle out of court. So I'm going to guess that eventually they realized, we're not gonna win this case. Either one, give her what she wants, or two, they came to they agreed on price. And then lawsuits are not uncommon to Alpine Meadows. I did a very, very quick search. 1987, 1992, 2014 were three.
This place is still open?
It is still open, yes. So those three dates came up. I did not go looking about like what those were about. In 2010, a snowboarder lost her footing and slipped and then slid over what I assume is a cliff and died.
Oh boy.
And with this case, they again ruled in favor of Alpine Meadows, that they didn't do anything negligent or wrong to cause this to happen.
Yeah.
It's part of the area that you're in. And then I believe in 2020 or maybe 2021, there was another fatal avalanche where two friends, one was killed and one was injured, and they are separately suing Alpine Meadows, and that is a current case that's happening. So Alpine Meadows is no stranger.
The term fatal avalanche is a little bit ironic, but
Well, I mean, there's avalanches that don't affect anybody.
if no one's there.
Fair. That's fair.
Wow.
All right, well,
What a story.
those who have listened to this whole thing, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it.
And if anyone listening has like more information on some of the topics we touched on, reach out to Kayla. I'd like to hear about that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's it's super interesting. Kayla, thank you so much for having me on and letting me do this with you.
Thank you for letting me do something that I'm like really nerdy about.
It's fun.
I enjoy reading the books. I enjoy doing the research. I enjoy telling the stories.
Yeah.
And, this is a nice little passion project for me, and it'll continue until I get bored,
Yeah.
which I don't think I will, because I have like hundreds of screenshots in my phone of like,
Oh,
this is a
nice.
story I could do. Oh, this is a story I could do. Oh, this is something I should investigate. So, yeah.
So if you want to support Kayla, join her Patreon.
Join Patreon. You get, real quick, you'll get the story that you get on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, anywhere you listen to podcasts. You get that version of the podcast early. So instead of releasing on Wednesdays, it releases on Monday. Also on Monday, you will get the uncut version of the episode. And for this particular story, I'm going to do a story only, just because there's so much other information in it, and you might not be interested in this information at all. You might just want to be like, I want to hear about the avalanche. So I'm going to cut out all the extra information and all the extra side stories that we go on, and you'll get just the story, which will be available Monday as well. $4 a month. and eventually there's probably going to be like bonus episodes.
Yeah.
I would really love to do merch at some point if I contact someone who's better at art than me, to help kind of design some things. So I think I'm going to do like Patreon exclusive merch. Yeah, things are coming.
Nice.
Join me. And thank you.
Thanks.